we're back with Lobby Concessionals, the movie podcast where nobody's right and everybody's wrong. That's Brendan. I'm Parker. Like and subscribe. Follow us along. Smash that like button.
Don't do that.
I haven't used it yet, so I've been saving it. Yeah. Brendan, what is your general vibe on studios, producers? If you were to describe them as a single entity, or it'd be, do you have impressions with those people?
Like in what sense? Like in just a general?
Are they good people? Are they evil people? If I were to be like, oh, what do you think about producers?
I think in a knee-jerk reaction, angry fanboy sense, I think the immediate reaction is that those are the people that get in the way of movies.
Man, it is perfect. It's almost like you knew what we were trying to talk about. That's like a great transition, actually. Wow. Nailed that. Yeah, I want to talk today about movies.
I hope so.
Yeah. I realized after saying it that was ridiculous. No, I wanted to talk today about specific movies that we have, for whatever reason, chalked up. The reason they suck or the reason they failed is because of studio interference.
Sure.
And then the other side of that coin, where movies that have succeeded or are only the product they are today because of
the less talked about positive outcome.
Absolutely. And I think to start this off, I want to make it clear, because it was not clear to me before doing research for this episode, what the difference is between a production company, a distributor, a producer,
chain of command, as it were.
Yeah. So what I found out basically is when I say the word producer, that is an individual. Yeah. Usually it is the head of a production company. But there is specific situations where they are like just an employee, basically.
Yeah.
A production company is quite large or can be quite large. And so, one of the larger production companies could have, a dozen products on the run. And so they're going to send various producers and they will get assigned to a particular project in a particular movie. So a producer is the individual. The production company is the thing at large. In some cases, they're massive. And again, they could have a dozen different things going on.
Yeah.
Or in some cases, they're much, much smaller. The other thing that's worth pointing out is the production company, as the name sort of denotes, now that I kind of think about it, they are involved in the production of the movie. They literally create it. So Marvel Studios is a production company because they are actively producing and creating the film. Yeah. And then the other big word is it's not a big word, but like the other big one is distributors.
That's a big word.
It's a small word, I guess. Okay, fair enough. We'll take it. So in a lot of cases, they buy rights to films. So distributors will show up to film festivals and stuff. And after the movie is made, they will buy the rights. And then they will distribute it. They are the ones that have contacts with theaters and theater companies, and they are the ones that make sure it gets put on screens. Yeah. They figure release dates. They do all of that.
So like an example would be like Palm Springs debuts at a film festival.
Sure.
Does well, and then Amazon, as a distributor, buys the rights to Palm Springs for distribution.
Absolutely. Yeah. Amazon is a great example of that. Yeah. Because I don't even know if Amazon has production, a production arm in terms of their films.
They do now for the Lord of the Rings stuff.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, it does. Yeah. So previous to that, everything that has Amazon in front of it was just a previously created film. Yeah. And they threw some money behind it. And also, the other thing the distributor does is a lot of the times it's marketing. Yeah. So they're a big part of the marketing arm, and they finance that and yada, yada, yada. Yeah. So Palm Springs, the Andy Samberg film, is a great example of that as well, because while it has a marketable lead and stuff, they definitely didn't have enough money to do the advertising that movie needed, So while we have this discussion, I think it's worth noting that The other thing is that in some cases, production companies are their own distribution. So some of the bigger ones, like Paramount, for instance, they are a production company, but they also distribute because they've been around forever. They handle all of that. But so I think we're kind of going to use these terms interchangeably. And effectively, they're going to mean the same thing in the context of this discussion. Because there is going to be some movies where we talk about here where an individual producer was the one that made a decision that either ruined the movie or saved it. Or there are some cases where the movie's already made, a distributor picks it up, and they say, but hold on, you have to change this. So actually, a good example of that is Joseph Gordon-Levitt's Don John. I believe it was 2014 or something. Anyway, he had created the film, put it out at film festivals. When it got picked up, the distributor said, sorry, for those that don't know, it's about him. He's basically like a sex addict. He's addicted to porn. He's, anyway, there's a scene where he is watching porn. And I guess for the distributor's taste, the masturbation was a little bit too much. So their only thing was, they're like, we'll pick up the movie. It looks great. You need to cut off the last 3 seconds of that scene. And that was it. And so he cut that, and I remember him doing an interview talking about how it was a great decision and that it helps the tone of the film because it got a little darker with apparently the end of that. And my imagination just runs wild. Like, how much darker could it get? Like, what were you doing, man? Anyway, so those decisions can be made too. So it might sort of seem like distributors can't really be involved, but they are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, we're going to use those sort of terms interchangeably. I'm going to probably just use the word studio to mean all of those things.
So we spent months training our audience to think that we don't talk in broad strokes. And we're going to tell them today that that's exactly what we're going to be doing. Absolutely. We're just going to erase months and months of effort. Here we go. But the other thing that's worth noting here is in a lot of these cases, some of it's hearsay. So you hear from a particular... Or read an article.
You hear from an actor, and the actor's like, oh, well, if the studio hadn't got involved, it would have been a masterpiece. And like, sure, maybe. I don't know. The other thing is that it's worth noting, films are... there's literally thousands of people that are involved in the making of a single film. So it's really hard to be able to say that, this one decision drastically impacted it and made it so that this movie couldn't be made properly, or that's the only reason this movie's terrible. There is so many little tiny decisions. But in general, we are going to sort of go with what we've heard, what we've been able to read or research. The other side of this is too, the other side of the coin here is the fact that generally people credit directors with creating a film, like The Departed is Martin Scorsese's film. And even though there's amazing performances in that, the reason that movie is amazing is because of Martin, not because of Leo. And that's a weird way of looking at movies. It's called, there's something in film studies, and I always screw up how I say it. It's Auteur Theory, I believe. And it's, and the idea is that you credit the director with all those things. It is not a perfect system, but again, for the context, for the sake of this discussion, we're going to be comparing studios, which is sort of everything money-wise, and directors, which is, the creator side of it, even though, any one
writer,
of these stories...
cinematographer, director of photography. I got you. We got you.
Anyway, any big things come to mind for you in terms of movies ruined by studios? Have you, any classic famous examples that you can think of that really stick out?
For ruining movies, the big one that sticks out to me is Alien 3.
Man, I am so glad you started with Alien 3. I was going to say Alien 3 too.
And it's not even just the ruining of a movie, but we almost lost David Fincher as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
In the process of a studio interfering so much that he didn't want to make movies anymore.
Yeah.
So that's when I think of studio interference and ruining movies, that's the one for me.
So for context, Alien 3 comes out in 1992. It's been a decade, I believe, since the first Alien, because it was 81, wasn't the first Alien?
79.
79, okay.
I think. I'm pretty sure, yeah.
So it has been 13 years since the first Alien.
Yeah.
And I understand there was Aliens in the middle there, and I think it was probably 5 years after. So,
yeah.
But it's been a little bit of time. They put first-time film director David Fincher on to helm the project.
Yeah.
Up until this point, he had done a bunch of music videos.
Lots of music videos, commercials and stuff like that.
Yeah, there was work. The guy clearly knew what he was doing. But at the same time, first time on a film set. And apparently, even before filming begins, they have 5 separate screenwriters brought in. And the studio was just cycling these things.
Yeah.
We need someone to do this, and they need to do it right. And apparently, of the 5, they basically just put Frankenstein together a script out of all of that work. And then they handed it to Fincher. And, they even begin filming without the complete script.
Yep.
Like, they have 5 people go through this. And then they're like, here you go. And he's like, oh, man. And, he's not a timid person. But I picture him as timid on his first project. And he's like, I don't want to step on any toes.
Those were the stories. Like, he kind of let the studio run over him a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they just told him what was up. To a point where, as far as I've heard, they literally lock him out of the editing room after the movie's done.
Yeah.
And granted, we have the benefit of hindsight. We've seen Seven and Fight Club and
all of them.
Benjamin Button and Gone Girl. Like, we know now that he is an incredible creative.
Sure.
And like, it's very easy to see. Okay, the guy that made Zodiac, you're gonna tell him how to run a movie. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, we can see now that it was a bad idea. But wow, like, I just can't imagine the gall of these guys to be like, no, you were on the set every day, but you clearly screwed it up. So, you can't even edit your own movie.
I mean, at the end of the day, you're like, if I was a producer on that film, and it wasn't going well, you blame the guy who only has directed Madonna music videos. Up to that point, right? And again, hindsight's a beautiful thing, but like, at the time, it's a big franchise, and it probably took a lot of work to get Sigourney back to begin with.
Fair enough.
So all of a sudden, and I don't know why people are bailing left and right, but that's probably another red flag in terms of having to land on the guy who does music videos.
Yeah, totally.
So you're already behind the 8 ball. Huge.
Yeah.
Huge. But it's still baffling.
It's seeing what a train wreck that movie is. And especially given like the incredible amount of goodwill they must have had going into Alien 3, given how incredible Alien and Aliens are.
Yeah. And they undo it in the first 5 minutes.
Oh, it's gone.
It's gone in the first 5 minutes, right? So, and I don't know if that's a producer or somebody or another, either or a creative, trying to put their stamp on a franchise. Because sometimes you go out of your way to be like, I don't want to be Alien. I don't want to be Aliens. This one is very distinctively me, so let's blow it up right out of the gate so people know. Yeah. Sometimes that works, but sometimes you have to read the room.
Yeah, totally. And I think you mentioned bringing back Sigourney. It very much could have been a simple matter of they kind of got her interested first, or they made sure she would come back. But they had a very slight window. And so they just did whatever they could to make it work. Clearly, it didn't work. So Alien 3 is a great example of this, is that studio involvement ended up making that project worse because of a variety of reasons. They clearly forced something that was never supposed to happen. They forced screenwriters and an amazing director to do things they weren't interested in doing, and you have a movie that doesn't look like it should be there. It shouldn't exist, frankly. One of the other ones I had that the first thing that pops into my head, and partially this is because of all of my merch, but Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Oh, that's a huge one.
So Andrew Garfield comes back for Amazing Spider-Man. I personally think the first Amazing Spider-Man is underrated, and with No Way Home coming out, people are, now the Andrew Garfield apologists are coming out of the woodwork. People are like, oh, I loved it from the beginning. But I actually did. It's what's really important. So I wanted to make this clear.
Us dudes in the actual trenches remember.
Yeah.
How much you guys absolutely shat on those movies and Andrew Garfield.
Oh, yeah.
He's too good looking. Fuck you.
Yeah. He's not supposed to be gross looking. So I love that first one. And then Amazing Spider-Man 2, Sony basically, it comes out in 2014. So we are 2 years removed from the first Avengers film. The MCU is blowing up. So Sony forces it and just goes, nope, we have to have a franchise as soon as possible. So they shove a bunch of villains in. They make a bloated movie that doesn't really make a lot of sense. I have heard over and over again that Mary Jane is supposed to be in this movie, that they shot scenes with her and then completely cut all of them. And even then, the movie's still 2.5 hours. It doesn't make sense. My understanding in this case is it's actually due to, or a lot of it is due to a single producer. Nope, can't remember his name. Anyway, Avi Arad is my understanding.
He babies that Spider-Man franchise.
Oh yeah, and so there's actually been a leaked memo that Kevin Feige had given some advice based on seeing a cut of that film and going, okay, wait, hold on. These guys need to be removed, like the extra villains. Yeah, and, you're gonna have a better time if you do this.
Yeah, needs more Rhino.
You could skip Rhino, but Paul Giamatti's great. Would have liked to have him be worthwhile in that movie.
Damn it!
But there's some weird choices, and my understanding, the internet's understanding, is that so many of those came down to a producer level, and the creatives involved with that movie were not happy about it. Yeah. Jamie Foxx was not happy about his villain in that.
No,
he did the movie, but he was like, "What is going on?"
Yeah,
and very clearly, when he comes back in No Way Home, he is stoked to be
there.
Yeah, and stoked to be the way the villain should have been portrayed from the very beginning.
Yeah, I mean, even Andrew Garfield on that press tour. Is just the energy just sucked out of him.
Oh yeah,
and I don't know if it was from the shoot or if it was just the way the movie ended, like if he felt the way the movie had turned out, kind of a thing. But
I think I grieve that movie still, and the producer influence really bothers me because I don't think I've ever seen a movie with two leads that have as good chemistry as Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield. Their connection in that movie is electric. And
I see what you did there.
Yeah. And it's just sort of wasted. It sucks that that's all we get.
Yeah. It's still the best parts of the movie is the two of them together.
Well, and I still really think they shouldn't have rushed the Green Goblin reveal. They should have let Gwen survive another movie.
Yeah.
I would have been okay with having a little bit of an MJ Gwen love triangle in the end of Amazing Spider-Man 2 going into Amazing Spider-Man 3. And there was a number of things that could have been done there that would have made that film significantly better. Yeah. And unfortunately, they didn't exactly give the right people the power to do those things, you know?
But it's hard to argue with a track record, though, right? We're talking about Avi Arad, but he had so much success with those Sam Raimi movies, and the X-Men movies that there's a lot of clout, and there's a lot of goodwill built
absolutely.
up there. But sometimes, things evolve past you.
Totally.
And it feels like a guy who is so out of touch.
Well,
is at the helm of those movies again.
Totally. Yeah. He'd been involved with Marvel and some capacity of Marvel Studios for years.
And years. He was a guy for the animation stuff. So he was there for the Spider-Man animated series and X-Men animated series and all the way through.
Totally. So he is a lifer. So on some level too, you're right that there was a history of success with this guy. Now, granted, he had clearly already made some bad decisions. My understanding was he was also involved with, he was already looking at another Spider-Man trilogy while Sam Raimi was finishing.
Or
Spider-Man 3. Yeah. Because Sam apparently would have done a Spider-Man 4, and there's been talk about how it was going to feature Mysterio and have Bruce Campbell as Mysterio, and so there was plans there, and the film franchise could have continued, but Avi apparently decided on his own.
Yeah,
we're going to do our own
but
thing.
both franchise killers have the same thing, right? Like that Spider-Man 3 movie, the Raimi movie, and Amazing Spider-Man 2 have the same problems, man. Just bloated characters and too many villains and maybe a mischaracterization of Peter at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So it's a disaster.
Well, and I've heard that the Venom thing was also forced, like in Spider-Man 3,
Absolutely.
is that Raimi doesn't like the character and he didn't want him in there. But because of the character's popularity, especially in the decade previous, in the 90s there, it was forced into the film. And
it doesn't fit in that world, right? I mean, we've talked about things like the new Batman movie, where certain villains just wouldn't fit in that aesthetic.
It's really hard to put Mr. Freeze in there,
or Clayface.
Yeah,
still championing for a Man-Bat movie, but but at the end of the day, Venom doesn't fit into that Raimi world. I don't think, at least. Those villains are very character centered, like that Doc Ock stuff. It works because you care about Otto.
Yep.
But the idea of if you had introduced Eddie Brock in first movie, and like had him show up and like kind of just tease the way through and kind of get to know him a little bit, but he just shows up and then there's a suit and all of a sudden and I have no idea what's going on. That movie's a dumpster fire.
Yeah. Oh, it's a mess, and it's so many of those characters are defined by their relationship to Peter.
Yeah.
It seems tacked on, like. Eddie Brock is suddenly there as a rival reporter.
Yeah.
And his whole character then becomes defined by Peter, but doesn't seem to exist in his own right, really.
Yeah.
So it does feel like it's tacked on. And unfortunately, like that's not the decision that needs to be made. While to balance sort of some things out, because we'll come back to some of the films that were ruined, but I want to give a couple examples of situations where movies have been saved.
Yeah.
So the David Fincher thing, actually, Fight Club.
Yeah.
Brad Pitt was hired because of studio interference. Basically, the studio pushed for it, and in fairness, I think that studio likely pushed for it because Brad Pitt was a bankable star, in the way that Ed Norton wasn't.
Yeah.
And so they were like, we can sell this movie with just Pitt. And they're right. They could do that. But that movie wouldn't be the same without Brad.
And that's almost that's doubly smart because you have a bankable star in Brad Pitt and then you have Oscar buzz Norton at the time because he was just coming off of like American History X and Primal Fear, I think it was.
Yeah. Primal Fear might have been a few years before.
But like he's just riding this wave of like critically acclaimed things. So now you have that guy plus the bankable dude.
Yeah.
And I almost wonder if, I think maybe that was the movie that put Brad in that upper echelon in terms of like, oh, he's not just a pretty face.
Yeah, oh, totally.
Like he went toe to toe with the Oscar guy.
Yeah.
And now he's that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think he does that. He does a really good job, Brad, of picking films because he does 12 Monkeys a little bit before this. And it's just him being a lunatic the whole time.
Yeah. Super underrated movie.
Oh, yeah. Great film.
Yeah.
And it's that really just shows his range. And so he did a good job of refusing to be typecast as the pretty face.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the fact that he comes back to play a bit of a pretty face here. Like, clearly it's violent. And it's not the same pretty face that he was in Meet Joe Black,
No.
But he is here to be bankable. And again, killer move by the studio. This is exactly what this movie needed.
Yeah.
And granted, again,
So I didn't know this. So Fincher was against that?
I don't think Fincher was against it. I think that Fincher, basically, the credit for hiring Brad goes to the studio.
Okay.
Based on the information I could find, I couldn't see what Fincher's point of view was on it.
Right.
I have heard about the film that they were great together on set. So they were clearly friends, and I believe they are still friends. Like, they hang out. They did Benjamin Button together a decade later. So there was definitely a connection. So I don't think Fincher was exactly against it, but it wasn't his choice.
It wasn't his choice.
You know, so and likely it wasn't his when the studio first pitched it. Likely he was, didn't love it either. Again, the heartthrob, like it's not really a Tyler Durden look.
Yeah.
Again, you look at Meet Joe Black. That's not Tyler Durden. It's
yeah.
But anyway, that stuff is amazing to me, and I love hearing those stories because it recenters the argument and the focus on the fact that, as much as the studios are money men and as much as they're people consider them to be, the ones getting in the way of the directors.
Yeah.
They know what they're doing, and they've been in the industry for forever.
Yeah.
So
nobody's going to bat 1,000, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
There's going to be mistakes.
Yeah. Speaking of mistakes, let's talk X-Men Origins Wolverine.
Oh no! Why?
Mainly, I realized I have a bunch of superhero stuff on here.
Well, let's talk. I think, can we do a quick aside?
We can.
Can we come back to? I'm going to use this time to mentally prepare for X-Men, but I want to talk about the superhero movie genre again because it's so prevalent in movies. But in this, it just feels like there's so many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah.
In terms of anything, and so when this came up, I immediately thought of Civil War, and we kind of had like a brief discussion about it.
Sure.
So the Russos and Feige, they ended up winning this argument, but the what you saw on screen, the studio didn't want.
Oh, okay.
And with Marvel particularly, this was the last movie they had him for, but they had a story group, and it was headed up by Brian Michael Bendis.
Oh, okay.
And Joe Quesada, and I think his name is Joe Buckley, who was who was the editor-in-chief for Marvel Comics at the time.
So those three names, just for those who aren't familiar, are big names as comic writers.
Yeah.
So Brian Michael Bendis created Miles Morales, for instance.
Absolutely.
Anyway, sorry, continue.
So they're part of a story group, and there's more people, but those are the big prominent names. And they're basically there to be like, okay, this worked in the comics. Let's try to get it as close to the comics as possible, but at the same time, try to Hollywoodize it.
Okay, sure.
So at the time, Feige and the guy who's running Disney at the time, or at least Disney Studios, like Perlmutter.
Oh yeah. Ron or whatever. Ron Perlmutter.
So they were butting heads a lot.
Oh, okay.
A lot. And so when they saw what they were going to do at the end of Civil War, the story group, which baffles me because they're comic guys, and Ike didn't want the Avengers to be split up at the end of that movie.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And Feige, who obviously has this planned out, and the Russos almost walk off the job.
Oh, wow.
And Feige almost quits. That's when there was a big story going around that he was going to leave. That was the reason.
Holy smokes.
And they fought tooth and nail to make that happen, the ending that they needed to happen. And because of how that movie performs, the story group gets dissolved, and Ike no longer is the middleman anymore. So Feige reports straight to Iger.
Wow. That's crazy.
That's nuts.
Like, especially considering that, a lot of those MCU movies don't have consequences, really.
No.
There's very few of them that really the consequences of the resolution that they've come to actually impact future films. So as a good example, Iron Man 3 finishes with Tony Stark blowing up all the suits and basically realizing that it's his arc as a character, and he's realized that the suits don't make the man, basically, and that he can still be a hero and not have Iron Man suits, and that he's a hero in his own right. And then the very next time we see him, I believe, is Civil War.
It's Age of Ultron.
Oh, Age of Ultron. And he's got suits again.
Yeah.
And there's no conversation about it.
Much like everybody else, Age of Ultron also forgot Iron Man 3.
But the consequences don't matter. Not in the same way that they should or could.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we should have had multiple movies with Tony Stark, just being Tony Stark with no Iron Man suits. But I do think it's interesting that's that this almost made people leave on both sides, and that people were stubborn enough about that choice that they were willing to lose incredible people.
Yeah.
Given the fact that they sort of just forget about these consequences between films. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, what's really, really crazy is that Perlmutter is notoriously cheap.
Oh, okay.
Notoriously cheap. So he hated Downey's contract at the time.
Oh.
He hated it.
Yeah.
Right? And he hates the idea that, okay, so after this, he's going to be in like a weird Spider-Man movie for like 3 minutes and we're going to pay him how much money?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, Feige's like, yeah. But the bottom line is that he's going to tack on how much extra money at the end of our bottom line.
Yeah.
And so they butt heads and then it comes to this. And Feige, to his credit, where a producer stuck up for that film's vision, puts his foot down. Like, if this is going to be a constant thing, I'm gone.
Yeah.
And again, to me, the story group backing the money guy is a strange thing. Considering Bendis was the guy that split the Avengers teams in the comics.
Yeah.
Right, Mark Miller writes Civil War, but
yeah,
but Bendis writes the New Avengers and the Mighty Avengers afterwards. There's a pro reg and an anti reg team, and so the idea that he sat there and be like, yeah, it should work this way. What are you talking about?
Wow,
what are you talking about?
Yeah,
like
that's nonsense. That's crazy.
Yeah, and this and just for reference, it's not speculation. This was the Russos coming out and having an interview and telling the story.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
And they would know, and they went on from Civil War to then direct both Avengers Infinity
Which is
War
goodwill built up from them and Feige, right? That's a
absolutely.
Trust. That's an absolute trust thing.
Oh, and so it really shows, I guess the thing is they come out and say the story, and they're still then directed 2 movies. Clearly, it's not like they were lying and they upset someone at Marvel, know? So that relationship still exists. That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. And so speaking of unbelievable, back to X-Men Origins Wolverine. I think the biggest thing that shocks me, there's plenty of bad decisions in this movie. But really what it's one of the biggest things for me is the Deadpool thing. They introduced Wade Wilson. We have Ryan Reynolds given an opportunity to be Ryan Reynolds in a movie. Let him, use his mouth, and then by the end of the film, when he's getting powers, they remove that completely, and then they make him not the character he is at all. So that was nonsense. It literally doesn't even make sense. At all. There's no part of that I'm like, oh, I could see where maybe they were trying to go with this. And then on top of that, what I've heard is that apparently initially the first drafts of this film were it was supposed to be his origin, but they were going to talk about PTSD, and so he had been in wars and stuff, and it was going to be a darker, grittier story about Logan, and the whole PTSD storyline was shot down. Any sort of grittiness was shot down. And then we have Logan coming out almost 10 years later that effectively does what Origins wanted to do.
Yeah.
And it makes the number is $620 million domestically versus X-Men Origins Wolverine earning $350 million. The numbers speak for themselves.
It's tough too. I'll tell you a couple of stories about Wolverine Origins because it's hilarious. Number one, they were still making movies for toys at that point, X-Men franchise.
Sure.
Right. So you're still making, you have 800 characters in there because you need
a lot
the
of
action figures.
Yeah.
You just don't. By the time we're here now, Logan's not made for action figures. It's
sure.
a very creative movie in terms of priorities. I owned a comic book store during that time, and one day a guy comes in and buys a bunch of comics, and he leaves a giant duffel bag. I have no contact or anything like that. So we open up the duffel bag, and they were filming at the time. So it's Wolverine Origins dailies, all the tapes. Months before the movie comes out, months. So we popped the tapes in. So we watched that movie being filmed. take after take after take after take. And we get to the Deadpool part, and I have no idea what's going on or why that decision is being made at all. And not wanting to get in trouble, so people start coming in and being like, man, that Wolverine movie looks good. And just the three of us behind the counter being like, sure. I can't say anything, but I watched that movie like without all the CG and all that stuff. So I watched.
Sure.
It's bad. Like it's and like I love Taylor Kitsch. Like I'm a big fan of Friday Night Lights and all that stuff. But him doing Gambit along a green screen is just brutal to watch. just brutal. Such a miscast. And so and I get a crazy appreciation for Hugh Jackman, because he, regardless of what scene it is or how bad, he's trying so hard.
Oh yeah,
he's just trying so hard, and everybody else in the movie is like, Will.i.am is in that movie.
Yeah,
just like no idea what's going on here, there, and I'm just. So we watched that movie, and it is a disaster.
Yeah,
a disaster of a process. So like. It's one thing to go into that theater and be like, oh man, that's just a bad movie. It's another thing to watch it as it's being made and to see actively the bad decisions being made.
Oh, yeah.
And then reliving them for 50 takes.
Yeah. Well, knowing you can't do anything about it either, like at least if you're on set, you could potentially put a word in someone's ear or something and just try and subtly.
Yeah.
But, being in such a passive place where you're like, well...
And it's weird because like I felt bad for the guy. I'm like, this guy lost his job because he lost this bag of tapes.
Oh.
But at the end of the day, I'm like, maybe that's a good thing that his name is not on this movie. It was just a blessing in disguise. So I when people bring up Wolverine Origins as like a weird Hollywood cautionary tale, I always think of that bag and watching it fail in real time.
Yeah. Oh. Man, that's a good story. To shift away a little bit from cape movies and to something that I find an interesting example is the Butterfly Effect, the Ashton Kutcher 2004 movie.
Jesus,
not a great movie.
It's all right.
I really liked it, but partially, and here's the rub: I watched the director's cut.
There's a director's cut for the Butterfly Effect?
There's a totally different ending.
Okay.
And so what I really liked about that movie, now granted, I probably watched it when I was like 15 or something. So it, it leaned into the right level of edginess for me.
Sure. You're a big punk guy too, so.
Yeah. So what they end up doing is the original ending is that basically he can go back in time, right, to his earlier life and affect certain events. And so what keeps happening throughout the movie is he affects certain things and then he goes forward and things have gotten worse. Yeah. And the common denominator, what he ends up realizing is that it's him, is that he's the problem. And so there's a whole subplot.
No wonder you relate.
There's a whole subplot about how his mom miscarried 2 or 3 dozen times before eventually having him. He was a miracle baby. His dad was in an asylum. His dad tried to kill him when he was a kid, and all of those threads come together in the director's cut for him to eventually realize that, first of all, he got this power, this time travel thing from his dad. And his dad realized when he was a child that the kid should never have existed, and that his dad had screwed with time to basically make sure that they ended up having a kid. And so in the director's cut, Ashton Kutcher goes back in time to in utero and then chokes himself out with the umbilical cord. And that's the end of the movie, is that everyone ends up being happier because Ashton Kutcher didn't exist. Anyway, I thought this was brilliant. So from an artistic point of view, that's what the director
Don't say
wanted.
artistic.
That's what the creatives wanted. That's what their plan was. The studio was like, no, not happening. And they put in a much more uplifting ending where he ends up like, stopping some kid from being bullied and then doing a couple other things, and then everyone's happy-go-lucky at the end. And so, again, they ignored what the artistic vision. The director's cut is, as far as themes and story continuity is concerned, it is a much neater story. Like there was various threads that just don't lead anywhere in the theatrical version, and they actually all do lead to the ending in the director's cut. But from a financial, movie success point of view, the theatrical version earns $100 million off of a $13 million budget. So they kind of killed it. And so like this is an interesting example because on one hand, I prefer the director's cut version. Is as misguided as that seems. But the studio is like, cha-ching, this absolutely worked out because we got involved and said this is ridiculous. Because there's 0% chance a baby choking himself out at the end of a movie
makes $100 million.
Yeah, like no way is that happening.
The butterfly effect is a weird one, and I'm kind of glad you brought it up because maybe we can talk about the other side of it for like a hot second. Is the marketing for the butterfly effect? I remember that movie coming out and being very confused when I went to see it because it felt like all the marketing leading up to it made it a weird thriller horror movie.
Okay, yeah. I can see that, yeah.
And that wasn't what it is.
Nope.
At all.
Nope. Like maybe if you're being...
if you reach for it.
If you're being nice, you could describe it as a thriller, maybe.
You maybe, but in the trailers and commercials leading up to it, it's very much advertised as such. And I wonder if they were trying to ride the weird Final Destination, Scream stuff with the teen heartthrob guy in a weird thriller movie kind of a thing. But that's got to be a studio thing too, right? Like, obviously, in terms of marketing and pitching it the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
I
think it's a hard movie to sell. They must have been in the middle of filming, and the studio guys just like, how the hell are you going to convince anyone to watch this?
Yeah.
So I get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another example in the improved section is the...
More of these than I thought.
There is quite a few, honestly. A shocking number. So a really quick one actually is Lord of the Rings. Is famously, I think it was Harvey Weinstein wanted Peter Jackson to make one movie. And so the Hobbits have since confirmed that one of the orcs in Two Towers, the leader of the orcs, what's his name, Gormog or something, is styled after Harvey Weinstein visually, and you can see it. Like it's definitely there.
Oh, it's a splitting image.
Oh. Anyway. New Line Cinema steps in as the production company, and they're like, no, make 3 movies. And like those wouldn't be the masterpieces they are unless that was 3 films.
Sure.
Especially considering like those extended cuts are 6 hours each. So if we were going to cut all of that down to one movie, oh man.
Yeah. But isn't it kind of funny? Like, a decade later, the production company comes in and is like, no, we have to make 3 Hobbit movies.
Oh, yeah.
for the exact opposite reason. And I don't know if that was a New Line thing or if that was a Warner Brothers thing either. Right?
The Hobbit decision? Yeah, I don't know. And honestly, I think that the Hobbit being 3 films would have been a little bit less of a problem if they had a different creative on it. I think Peter Jackson was just so exhausted and he didn't want to do it.
Nah.
If Del Toro had stuck around, frankly, I don't think Del Toro would have done 3 movies. But
if he did, they wouldn't be all out yet.
Yeah, fair point. But if Del Toro had stuck around, those would have been I think those would rival Lord of the Rings in terms of a achievement,
a quality thing.
Yeah. Have you ever seen Killing Them Softly? Movie from 2012 with Brad Pitt.
Yes.
I love it.
Yes.
I think it's a great movie. So the director, Andrew Dominics, is what I have written down. So forgive me if I'm wrong. He had previously, the last movie he did was The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford.
Yeah.
And it was a boring 3+ hour plot.
That I loved.
Yeah, well, I had a hard time. So apparently the Weinsteins actually stepped in here and they said, "You are a good creative. We cannot let you be unleashed here. Like, you need to be reined in." So they told him that they will give him the money and they'll let him do another movie, but it can't be more than 95 minutes. And that is the only reason, or not the only reason, but that is a big part of the reason why Killing Them Softly works. And it's such a good film, is that it's quick. The pacing is well done. And it's not even that like an actiony or a punchy kind of movie.
No.
It is still a little bit more of a plot, a little bit more of it's more nuanced. But if that movie was longer, it would be a snore fest. And so as far as I'm concerned, saves the movie.
Save the movie.
Oh yeah, 95 minutes saves that film.
I guess it's tough because this is where subjectivity comes in. Because I don't have a problem with longer movies. Like I said, like if it came out as long or as maybe as plotting as Assassination of Jesse, I think I'd be okay. Like I still really enjoyed that movie, right? But
sure.
Killing Him Softly is a great movie. So
yeah.
It's I don't know that I don't think I'd change much. So in that sense, I think you're right. But I don't know that handcuffing him like that is a definitively better or worse thing.
And that's a fair point.
Yeah.
I remember hearing a story about The Social Network, and that when the script was written, oh God, I'm blanking on the name again. Can you remind
For the script?
Yeah.
Aaron Sorkin.
Thank you. Can't do it.
Yeah.
Sorkin wrote out the script, and he hands it in, and it's like 700 pages. It's not 700, but it's massive.
Yeah.
And the studio's like,
Sorkin-esque.
Yeah. Like, what is this? And he goes, "Oh, it's a 2-hour movie." And they're like, "No, it's not. You're full of it." And he goes, "Yeah, it is." And so he sits down with Fincher, and the two of them record it. Or no, sorry, I think it was just Sorkin. He records himself saying the script.
Yeah.
At the pace it needs to be said, and it comes out at 2 hours. So they take that recording and they show it to the actors, and they say, "This is how you deliver everything." And I think that's brilliant.
Yeah.
So I think pace matters, and I think that
sure.
I've heard this about David Lynch, that there's that great shot of him on set where there's a script supervisor, and she says something about, so do you think we can get another one, but it's like a little bit shorter? And Lynch yells at her. And he's like, "What is this with always having things be shorter? I'm going to make the movie I want to make." And I'm like, "David, no one watches your movies, man. Like,
that's a lie. He's great."
They're not financially successful, and it's because he insists to do 7-minute takes that make no sense. So I wish he had listened to that script supervisor.
No, I wouldn't change a thing about David Lynch. I wouldn't change a thing.
Oh, no, he, as a person, is incredible. But it's just because I can see videos like that. Another one I thought was really interesting was Dredd from 2012.
Oh, yeah, the Carl Urban.
Yeah.
Great movie.
Love that movie.
Good
Absolutely
movie.
adore that movie. As a quick side note, I once Carl Urban was in town here for a Comic-Con, and I hung out at a few bars around where I knew the actors were staying, like the hotel they would typically put up in, and ended up running into him at this bar, and he was hanging out with his Battlestar Galactica buddies. And so I didn't want to be one of these people that like stands at his table and is like, "Oh, while you're eating dinner, sign this for me or chat with me." So I just sort of leered at him for a while. But when he left, him and the friends are all leaving, and they're loaded. They had a bunch of wine, and I was like, "It's now or never. Like, I'll just ask, So I run over there and ask him for a picture, and I had a few drinks by this point too, and he was super gracious. He was super nice. He goes, "Yeah, let's do it." So I'm taking this picture, and because I had had a few drinks and I had no idea what to do, I immediately start crying. It's like, I'm so sorry they didn't make another Dredd movie. And he's like patting me on the shoulder while trying to smile and take this picture with me. And he's like, it's fine. Anyway, I love Dredd. Incredible movie. But apparently, the director, Pete Travis, he wanted a slower and thoughtful film. He wanted it to be a little bit more, again, nuanced. He wanted to really consider the emotional impact of Dredd and his decisions and, you know, what life was like in Mega City 1. And the writer, Alex Garland, was like, this is ridiculous. And
Alex Garland, the same Alex Garland?
The very same.
Yeah?
And
I didn't know that. That's cool.
The studio ends up stepping in and going, okay, this isn't the script that was written. And Alex is like, it was not. So they actually gave him editing duties. So they shove out the director, Pete Travis, and they give Alex Garland editing duties.
Whoa.
And so he cuts that film into the film we see now, the action film.
Crazy.
And like, that movie's a masterpiece. So
I had no idea Alex Garland was on that movie and they did that. That was the case.
You know, now that you're really stoked about it, I actually don't know 100% it's the same Alex Garland. I'm 95% sure. But now that you're like questioning,
it would make sense.
It would seem right.
It would make sense. Yeah. That's cool. Even if it isn't, that's a bonkers story.
Oh yeah, right?
Yeah, it's more unbelievable if it isn't that Alex Garland, to be honest.
Yeah, I would agree. So, yeah, absolutely. The other thing was the Matrix. Apparently, the initial
cast of that movie is insane.
The initial cast, I've never heard this.
Will Smith is Neo.
Oh, I did hear that.
Yeah, I forgot who Morpheus was supposed to be, but it was supposed to be. It was also like a really, really
nonsense.
Strange. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I do remember that. No, he did Wild Wild West instead.
He did, but there was also like the studio had wanted somebody else, and I'd read this recently, and I'm completely blanking, but there was somebody else that they wanted for Neo, and the Wachowskis said no, it has to be Keanu.
Well, and I think it works out. You know, I like Keanu a lot. He is unfortunately not a great actor. He is very good in some things, and he's good at being a particular character.
Sure.
He's great as Neo. I think he fits the role.
Yep.
So I'm glad he's, you know, that it ended up the way it was. But apparently their initial script, the humans, they have them all, like the machines get them all connected to a neural network. And that's sort of how the Matrix itself is running. And there's this whole level of complexity that they've added in there. And the studio stepped in and went, no. And they said, make the humans batteries. And I think it's brilliant because it serves the purpose it needs to. We know that humans are, like, effectively what you need from that movie. Humans versus machines. The real world is not what we think it is. And then you need, by the end of it, Neo to being able to take control of the Matrix, right? So I don't need to know the whole ins and outs of how the entire system works, and that's why I start hating those movies after the initial Matrix, is because they go way too in depth about stuff that doesn't matter.
Yeah, and it doesn't make sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so somehow someone at the studio stepped in on that first one and went, nope, we're simplifying this. And I think, unfortunately, because of the success of it, the Wachowskis are given more power as the trilogy goes along, and it doesn't work out, you know. So
power that lasts 20 years apparently to make another one.
I haven't seen it actually.
I have no interest. It's a weird. I mean, I think we talk about it a little bit in franchise burnout.
Oh sure, yeah.
And I'm just like, I don't know why we have a new Matrix movie. I just don't.
Yeah. There's like one bit in the trailer that I'm like really stoked about. When the guy that plays Kristoff in Frozen, he's great. I know I can't think of his name. Man, I'm having a hard time with names today.
Yeah.
And he goes, "Wow, we're going back to the Matrix." And I love it every time. Oh man,
that would be the one for you.
Oh, just
low hanging fruit.
Oh, it just scratches an itch for me, you know. Oh man. So as far as I'm concerned, to get that scene alone and put that in trailers, it was worth making the movie. Oh man,
I don't know why we're here sometimes.
I got two more.
Yeah, let's
maybe
do
to
it.
wrap us up. So first of all, or actually, which one do you want first? You want the studio screwing up or doing a good job?
Let's do the screw up.
Let's screw up.
Now,
Okay.
let's end on a good note.
So this is a good choice because this might get me some internet hate. So I put Justice League on here.
Oh baby, here we go. We should have done the whole episode on this.
Yeah. So I personally believe that the theatrical cut is a better film.
Yes, agreed.
And that's
now they have
Snyder
to hate both
cut
of us.
Is bloated and doesn't really work. However, the fact is, Whedon was brought into that film. I think he makes a better film, but he does that at the cost of his actors. You know, all of them have come forward and said they were abused. And, you know, essentially part of the reason the DCEU falls apart, besides, you know, poor overall creative direction from, I would say, Zack Snyder, is the fact that everyone is burnt out and exhausted and hates their lives at the end of filming Justice League.
Yeah.
And as far as the reports have been shown, that's because of Whedon.
Yeah.
So as much as I think that, again, Whedon does a good job in that film of making it a little bit more interesting, I think it's cut better. I think it's, you know, punchier. It's faster.
It's still Frankensteining a turd. Like, it's like at the end of the day, it's just a less turdy turd.
But well, and that's the thing is that you brought in the guy that ended up effectively costing you this cinematic universe. Yeah. You brought in the guy that effectively caused everyone to go, nope, don't want to be involved anymore.
Yeah.
You know, I've heard that about Ben Affleck. I don't know if it was explicitly Whedon, but he had such a poor time. He was supposed to make his own Batman.
Yeah,
movie,
he left.
You know?
He bailed on it.
And like, so clearly this was a poor studio decision. Maybe not from the final product point of view.
Yeah.
And like, I think I'm in the minority when I say I think the Whedon film is better.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people prefer the Snyder cut. So even from a studio point of view there, maybe what they should have done from the very beginning is just delayed it. You know, like obviously Zack steps away because his daughter commits suicide.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm not saying, you know, make him continue making the movie.
Yeah.
But I do think that, you know, maybe they should have just delayed it a year. Or maybe, I don't know.
And that's an extra tough one too, because at the end of the day, we have kind of like inklings of allegations of Whedon when he's hired. Sure. But if you're just looking from a resume standpoint, that's the right call.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
As a studio, being like, yeah, just give us the guy that made the 2 Avengers movies.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the right call at the time. I mean, you can look back on it now and be like, yeah, he fucked it up, but that movie was bad to begin with, guys.
Yeah.
Like he's not doing anything. He made the best way for me to describe that movie is Whedon makes a shorter, shitty movie.
Yep. And there's a couple weirdness, like the Flash falling into Wonder Woman.
Sure, the Whedonisms are there, and it's
thing.
A little strange thing. But for every guy who comes up to me and be like, and gives me what I'm gonna say are hollow reasons why the Snyder cut is better.
Yeah,
those aren't good enough to swing me to the idea that that's a better movie. There's not enough change in those movies other than the length.
It's a good point.
At the end of the day, like even if we think the Whedon one is a little funnier, or the Snyder one is a little bit more emotional or has more cyborg, but he's still a crap character in that movie. There's not enough. You can argue all you want. Cyborg has a bigger role. Time doesn't make it a bigger role. He still adds nothing to the film.
Totally, absolutely,
right. So.
Yeah,
I mean that's an episode in itself. I mean,
it's a tough one. It's a tough one. My last one I want to touch on was in terms of movies improved by studio interference. And I think this is a good ending just because, again, I might piss people off, but
let's do it. Well, we would have lost everybody now. So
I think Rogue One is improved by studio interference. So widely considered to be one of the best films created in the Disney era. Or best Star Wars films, obviously. My understanding is that the oh god, no, I can't do names. I just can't.
Gareth Edwards.
Gareth Edwards. Damn, I was thinking of Josh Trank, and I'm like, nope, no, he's Fantastic Four.
Yeah, he was the Boba Fett movie.
Oh yeah.
He gets fired from the Boba Fett movie.
Anyway, Gareth Edwards. He is at this point I think he had just finished the Raid. When he's hired, or
not the Raid. It was
not the Raid.
No, the guy. No, not the Raid. That's a different.
No. I'm falling. No,
you're good though. But I think it's the Godzilla movie.
Oh yeah. So anyway, he comes onto this film and he shoots it like an indie film. Which, granted, that was effectively like he was known for indie films. He was known for a little bit more of a loose, let's be creative kind of style. There's a famous shots of her in the, what's it called? Like she's just in the trailer. She like turns back towards the camera at one point. And it lights up behind her, and that was just something that had happened by chance on set. And he was like, whoa, go back. We're going to shoot that. Yeah. And they literally, it's not a shot in the movie. He doesn't have...
There's a bunch of stuff in the trailer that's not in the movie.
Yeah. And it's because they just shot a bunch of stuff that they thought was cool. And so what happens in this case is they shoot a bunch of stuff and then they get to an editing room and have a disjointed mess of a film.
Yeah.
And so the studio comes in and they're like, no, this needs to be... They add structure, basically. So... He didn't get kicked out or anything, but he definitely got locked down a bit. And they were like, whoa.
Yeah.
We need to be really clear. This needs to follow. There needs to be story here. There needs to be some structure. There needs to be some alignment. And it's funny because I think fans really blame Disney for ruining the sequel trilogy and for, it was their influence that completely screwed this up. But again, I think it's the only reason that Rogue One ends up coming out as something that is not disjointed is because they forced some level of structure and coherence to a film that did not have any of that.
No, and we can talk about it another time, and we will. But Star Wars fans scapegoat Disney for the faults of those movies and anything that's come out, and it's they pick and choose and they cherry pick.
Yeah,
when things are at fault and when thing, and it makes no sense to me. I hate it, and we'll talk about it at some point. I'm assuming down the line.
Yeah.
There's
no way we can avoid it.
Yeah, we'll just lump in the Snyder Bros and the Star Wars guys and just take them all on in one episode. But that's but it does. It's weird because it also basically informs the way they do business moving forward. How Edwards is on that film and how they handle that is a direct result of why Lord and Miller aren't on Solo.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they are known for being a little slapdash as well.
A loosey-goosey with their filming, right?
So, yeah. And it's unfortunate because I honestly think a Lord and Miller Solo film is a far better film than what we got. Yeah. What we get is safe and boring and, not really worth mentioning. But Lord and Miller could... I think at the end of the day, given what we ended up getting, I would rather have a zany, crazy, doesn't make a lot of sense Lord and Miller Han Solo film versus what we end up getting, because what we get is boring.
Really. Yeah, I just want something different in my Star Wars.
Totally.
It's time. It's time.
Yeah. Let's stop going to Tatooine. So I guess closing thoughts. The interesting thing I find about all this is so much of this is only proven with the benefit of hindsight. I can't say that in every case locking a editor out and giving or locking a director out of the editing room and giving editing rights over to the writer was a good call, but it was a good call in the case of Dredd.
Sure.
And I can't say for a fact that telling a director you can only shoot this movie can only be 95 minutes is always a good call. And I would say in most cases it probably isn't, but it was a good call in the case of Killing Them Softly.
Yeah.
So, it's a crapshoot a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think what it comes down to is when you get a studio and a producer that understands their creative, and when you have a relationship there that maybe knows their strengths. Because that clearly doesn't happen in Alien 3. That studio clearly doesn't understand what they have in Fincher, and they railroad him.
Yeah, or Alien Resurrection, or Prometheus.
Yeah, well,
or Alien Covenant.
The whole thing. But I just mean,
yeah.
In the case of Alien Resurrection, at least they took a little bit of a chance with that French director guy.
Yeah.
But like Fincher, he could have done this on his own.
Yeah.
And him being railroaded. Now we'll never know what a Fincher
movies are complicated, man. Like at the end of the day,
Totally.
and then I think it's tough too because then we're talking about the business of it more so than the creative part of it. And at the end of the day, the money messes everything up, right? If you're gonna put $100 million into a movie, you need to make back $300 million.
Yep.
So what seems to be a small decision, like putting Brad Pitt in Fight Club, seems like a small thing to begin with, and ends up making a lot of careers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So it's a tough thing to balance.
And again, like we're talking literal thousands of people that are involved in films.
Yeah.
Who knows? Who knows? And I've heard this from actors before. They talk about how you never know if a picture is going to be good until it's done.
Yeah.
And you think it is, and you got your hopes, and you're investing your time and effort and dreams in this.
Yeah.
And then it comes out as a stinker, and like ugh, sucks. So I guess what I mean to say is, I don't think producers make or break a movie. In terms of like they're not the only ones. I think there's plenty of examples where either thing happens.
Yeah.
But I think it's just super interesting to see the difference between the two, and then there is situations where one decision really could have radically shifted.
Yeah.
Like,
I think it's also a really unique thing to break down those stories and realize how collaborative it all is. So if you fail it as a thing, even though I think the director takes on a lot of the blame.
Totally.
But it's weird to see movie fans immediately blame the studio. And not quite understanding what that all entails.
Totally.
Right.
Totally.
Again, we talk about Star Wars, and we will talk about Star Wars, but like that stuff bothers the crap out of me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I think some of it's easier to blame a faceless studio than it is to blame David Fincher, or it is to blame Alex Garland, or
the Alex Garland,
the one and only. So I think that's some of it, but I agree that the fans have a tendency to cherry pick their favorites, and they're never going to blame them.
No.
Same with Snyder.
Oh my God.
Anyway, I think really the summary is we love Zack Snyder. See you next week.